Hey, what's up guys, Snap here. I've had a little bit of time off of the league now, got my life back in order, and today we're going to be talking a little bit about our experience in Sanctum, going over all the builds, all the strats, what are our conclusions, and what do we think of the state of group MFing in the current patch. There is a lot to go over, so let's just jump right into it, shall we? First things first here, some astute observers might have noticed that after we did some early ruckusing and some early chaos recipe, we quickly pivoted our strategy to something that is brand new, and that is Heist. That's right, we 6-man heisted. It's a super degenerate, ultra cringe strategy that just is somehow like one of the best moneymakers that a 6-man can possibly do right now. Even though it isn't that amazing, it still is quite solid. And at the top end, you can be making around like 30 to 35 divs an hour. That's it with the best contracts with a solidly built runner character. So you're looking maybe at about like 5 to 7 divines per person. And the 7 being like absolute max efficiency, degenerate, no downtime with a really solid build. And the norm you're probably going to be getting is more like 5. So that is the reason precisely why we rolled 2 Rangers on our league start. So our plan was to have only 1 person push Atlas, and we had 4 people that were doing Ruckus and Chaos recipe, and then we had a Heister who was sitting in the background leveling up all of his rogues so that we could eventually execute this strategy, which was to heist with a speed farmer. And you're basically buying the contracts that give you the dildos, the urns, the stupid artifacts. And the way it works is you go into the heist and your heist farmer opens up all the doors for you because he's faster, and then everybody gets to the end, they open up their inventory, they double click on the artifact to flip it on the ground, the runner picks up all of the artifacts and runs out with them, and everybody else can either warp out or log out, and then you reform the party and do it again. If you're doing it at max efficiency, you can get about 1 contract done a minute, maybe like a minute 30 if you're slow or if you get interrupted while opening doors, but generally your average should be about like a minute to a minute 10, maybe a minute 15. If you do that all day for 14 hours without stopping, you're making a clean 300 to 400 divines profit per day. Now, I don't know if this will be nerfed or not. My guess is after watching something like that, this strategy is going to be fucking deleted next league, but it's interesting to talk about it. Anyways, knowing GGG, it's possible that the strat doesn't get deleted because Heist seems to have plot armor. It's just somehow a paid actor because D-level heisting somehow isn't nerfed after all these years. So we'll see where the strat goes. To talk about this build, I kind of yoinked this from our friend in the Discord, Aurabot there. He provided this to me and I kind of modified it to make it a little bit cheaper. It's nothing crazy. It's just a self-chill raider with a bunch of transcended spirits. Got 2 Ichimangis on to abuse rage buff effect. Basically, you get some mana regen, you throw on Chainbreaker, you get a Devotos for movement speed, hopefully with a Berserk buff effect. Queen of the Forest, you cap out your evasion, and you self-chill to make yourself go faster. Top end, it's like 1100, 1200% movement speed is like the highest you can eke out here. So honestly, anything that's above like 700-800 is plenty fast because you're going to be waiting on the rest of your party anyways. So this might be a little bit overkill. There's a couple versions in here if you want to look at them. There's early, mid game, and then end game with a Mage Blood. There's a Mage Blood version if that's something you're interested in doing. This probably isn't something super new, but I'm going to include the POE for anybody that's interested in doing it. Thing is that this strategy is probably going to be viable all league because the price of rogue markers frankly doesn't move no matter what you do to it. We were farming maybe like 1.5 million rogue markers per hour, and we were just dumping them onto the market. Millions, 5 million markers, 10 million markers, and the price of rogue markers like at the lowest was like 1 to 600. They're going to hover around like 1 to 500, 1 to 600, and it is really hard to move that. As people get into higher tier maps and more people start saturating the market with priceless and precious contracts, the strat becomes a lot easier because the main challenge is actually obtaining the contracts fast enough for you to be able to churn through them with a 6-man party. But you're going to be only making like 30 divs an hour split between 6 people, and then that's also maybe with plus a trader, so divide by 7. The strat's okay but not amazing, but it is solid to do on a league start when it's hard to get mapping supplies, they aren't super available, and you don't necessarily have your Atlas completed yet. Other than that, all of the builds went super well. There is 2 interesting adjustments here that we made because we had to fit in 2 Rangers here, and that is because our carry is actually a Deadeye. This is essentially a Deadeye build that we put together that could use Spark. We wanted to obviously do Call of the Brotherhood Nebulous, the traditional shenanigans, and then just slap it on a Deadeye. This is the tree that we came up with here. A couple things we wanted to abuse here. Mainly, we wanted a Militant Faith with a Inner Conviction, so we still aren't using any Frenzy charges, which is why we went Deadeye over Raider, because we can't abuse Frenzy charges. The reason we don't want Frenzy charges is because we don't want to click the Frenzy charge altar to reduce our global defense. If you don't have Frenzy charges, it allows you to click it. Deadeye has some pretty good defenses from the Gale forces that you get, the less damage taken. It also has an extra chain when it bounces off the wall, and then it also gets 2 extra projectiles. It's a pretty good Spark Ascendancy, especially in a party that can carry the negative, and it honestly might be like one of the highest damage carries we've had so far. I think it performed a lot better than we thought it would. One thing to note here that we've been doing is the Impossible Escape at Acrobatics. You can get additional chaining range as well as additional Pierce for free over here. It's a pretty good spot. Other than that, the clusters are going to be basically what you've seen before, which is aerodynamic streamline to get as much prod speed as possible. And then the rest of the tree is just grabbing some duration. You get the elemental mastery here so you can become reflect immune, get some ES on the tree, some flash charge stuff so you have more vol sparks, and then some crit multi here and here. It's a pretty cookie cutter carry tree. Not too much to talk about. Anyways, let's move on to the Aurabot. The Aurabot gear here might be something a little different than what you've seen me do traditionally. I was planning on going a Redeemer 30% aura effect chest, but I opted to go to a Victario's. I want to try something a little bit different, and the reason I was able to go Victario's is because I got the Timeless Jewel down here for 3 notables. As I said in my build com video, if you're able to get an Elegant Hubris with 3 notables, it's super easy to pull off this Victario build where you path all the way around the tree, all the way to Champion of the Cause, and you get enough aura effect to be at 89 over cap without too much investment. I did end up going a Master of the Tribunal because if you're not familiar, on the Atlas tree, the synthesis nodes that used to have something like a 3% chance to drop a synthesis item no longer exist, and so it was extremely hard to get synth aura helms early on in the league. And so we ended up buying a Mask of the Tribunal for 4 divines, which I think was a steal. Honestly, might be the best way for you to get an aura effect helmet now, because honestly, with the removal of the synthesis nodes up here, you're not going to be getting a ton of those synth aura helms like you used to. And at the price point, Mask of the Tribunal just makes sense. Cyclopean Coil just helps with the attributes to hit the 1000 attribute breakpoint for Mask of the Tribunal. Hitting 1000 is super easy. You get 8% reservation efficiency, and if you actually want to optimize the build a lot more, you can go even higher on this number if you get better cluster jewels. My cluster jewels were pretty garbage here. I didn't even bother getting 35 effect cluster jewels, but you can definitely bump these up, get better intelligence, chaos res, that kind of thing, and get even more efficiency and jam in stuff like vitality or even a clarity. Yeah, I was super happy with this build. It was actually quite cheap. I really like the pathing all the way around to Champion of the Cause, and it is super easy to do if you get an Elegant Hubris with 3 notables. I think in the future, if I'm able to get jewels like this with 3 notables and any of the sockets that's not going to fuck up, then I'm definitely going to try and do this pathing if I can get an Elegant Hubris in any socket that is viable, because this is probably one of the cheaper Aurabots that I put together that hits the stats of 89 over cap. One last thing to talk about with the builds here is on the curse bot. The Anathema ring is surprisingly like 5 chaos when we bought it. I didn't put out any builds with this ring because I just thought it would be way more expensive and way more rare than it actually is. But since you can get this on the curse bot now, what you can actually do is drop the boots and the helmet and the ring, and you can get a Crusader wing with a fuck ton of ES here, more stats if you need it, as well as Syntrex if you just want to slap on something easy. But you can also replace this with a pair of rare boots. You probably want to still take Vixens because it is the easiest way to apply curses still, but the Anathema ring lets you replace the other ring with something else, and it also frees up your boot slot. So if this is super cheap, definitely worth doing. Curse bot still performed pretty well with the nerfs. I think it was still very strong. We really wouldn't change anything here. It is still very, very good. As for the rest of the builds, Mana Guardian, Polar, those are all pretty much the same. I'm not going to really speak on those too much. Next up is our Atlas passive tree that we settled on. So if you weren't following our strategies throughout the day, we ended up doing Kirak maps. Kirak maps being these specifically, which have the modifier that reads, this map's modifiers to quantity of items also applies to rarity. The way this works is the quantity line you see here, which is 74%, gets added to the rarity, which is 97%, and you can easily get something like 200 to 220 rarity baseline on your map before you start clicking altars. This is pretty powerful for MFing early on, but once you see uniques dip in price around day 3 and 4, this becomes a lot less good, and honestly, MFing in general in the end game, especially in a group, is kind of not in a great spot. Before I talk about my overarching thoughts on MFing and group MFing in the end game, let's just go over our passive tree. We did a heavy focus on Arby, Abyss, and Breach mainly, as well as Eldritch Altars. The reason we chose those is you essentially have 2 options if you're going to map at the end game. You can either do a Apothecary map, which is Crimson Temple, Crimson Township, or Defiled Cathedral, and you can MF Apothecaries. Your other option is the aforementioned Kirak maps. The Kirak maps only roll on natural T14s, 15s, and 16s, which means that you're basically going to be doing a random layout every single time. We kind of know roughly what the rough card drop rate is going to be this league for Apothecary in a 6-man with full quant MF, and it's somewhere in the ballpark of like 1 in 30 maps. It'd be a little bit more common depending on how lucky you are with altars. It could be a little bit less, but I think the ballpark you want to put it in as like 1 to 30. So every 30 maps you can expect with full winged juice, that is, to get an Apothecary. Now, I don't know if that's enough to carry all of the mapping supplies you're dumping in, because it's going to cost you like 10C, maybe 15C to reroll the map. You're going to exalt it to full. You're going to be spending money on Sextant, and then you're talking about maybe 100 Chaos and Scarabs. You do that over 30 maps. If you're not getting a ton of other shit out of the maps that's not Apothecary, it's not going to be super lucrative. But the thing we tried to do early on is capitalize on a window in which uniques are still really expensive, which is the aforementioned Kirak maps. Now, obviously you have to drop the Divination Scarab because you're not doing a map with a great Divination card, and so you can choose 3 juicing mechanics, and we chose Harby, Breach Abyss, simply because they just have the most rare spawning mechanics. This is a pretty standard Atlas tree. The reason you go Eater of Worlds is so you can get Eldritch Gaze, which gives you the 50% increased effective upsides because you're really looking out for the Quant and Rarity altars. Additionally, the Shadow of Hunger gives you the increased chance to spawn altars, which these 2 nodes alone make it worth running Eater over Exarch. Separate from that, we just went out of our way to grab all the Abyss nodes because honestly, Abyss is the best rare spawning mechanic in the game right now, hands down. And then we just took the Harbinger with the King Harby node. We took Flash Breach with the other Breach nodes here. And then some might notice that down here, we took the Immune Response node. The reason for that is because I don't know if there's any other great Sextants to put on a map because Blight is the best rare spawning mechanic and it's super easy to just put it on a Sextant and then you get Immune Response and you get a pretty good bang for your buck that way. If you think about the possible Sextants you can put on your map, there's nothing that's super appealing that will really spawn more rares. So our mapping juice looked something like a Blight Sextant, Beyond, Soul Gain Prevention, and then an extra Abyss or 2 if you could get the elevated version. The only thing you can really consider in place of Blight is Delirium reward bars fill faster, and that's only if you can get your hands on some pretty good Deli Orbs and sustain that. But for our party, we really couldn't be asked. We just wanted to see how good the rares were. We wanted to jam as many rares on the map, and so we went with Blight as one of the Sextants, and then we just pathed over here to double the amount of mobs that come out. And so when we started mapping, the uniques was actually pretty okay. We were getting a lot of money out of specifically like Gloomfang was like 1 or 2 divines, but after about a day, there's like a period in which on day 4 or 5 of the league where uniques just really plummet in price. And this is really problematic because that makes up like 90% of your profit. And as soon as all of these 1 to 2 div uniques go down in price to like 10, 20C, your profits are basically eliminated. And it's no longer worth for you to put winged scarabs on your map at all. Because if you can buy gilded scarabs for like 2 to 5C versus the 25 to 30C that you're paying for winged scarabs right now, it's just a no-brainer to go at a lower level of investment and run the maps faster. And the reason this is because GGG took extra precaution to protect themselves from the group party abuse that we all partake in. Now, all of the following is just pure speculation on our part. We have no idea exactly how this works, but anecdotally, this is the stuff that we've experienced, and it kind of all fits with the general feeling of drops that we've been experiencing. And that is, I'm pretty sure that the new conversion mechanics that the rares are doing completely ignore the rarity on your character as well as the party rarity bonus. And this was speculated as the league came out. Fishwife, who does all of the fishing science posts, maybe you're aware of him, he posted this that he found in the game files, which is monsters dropped items ignore party rarity and monsters dropped items ignore player rarity. We weren't quite sure what these did at first, but there was some speculation that these 2 specific handlers were addressing MF with conversion. In the Q&A, we didn't really get a clear answer on whether or not rarity was going to affect the monster conversions, but I think now we have a pretty good idea that we know that they don't. So rarity from your character from Venters does nothing to the conversions, as well as adding more members to your party does nothing to those rarity conversions. Now, you still get more items from quantity bonuses from adding players to your party, as well as quantity bonuses on gear. So if you are MFing with about 100 quant as well as 6 players, you are going to see larger loot explosions than if you were to be MFing solo. However, these are not exponentially scaling like they might have been in the past. And so this leads to a situation in which 6-man MFing past maybe the first few days of the league is not really something that's worth doing. I can't really speak for the efficacy of solo or duo players, but my guess is that low investment Kirak mapping with maybe like 100 quant in a duo is going to be extremely lucrative because the barrier to entry is so low and you don't need to split your profits between 6 people. I think the unfortunate reality is that there is no way for you to exponentially scale your drops in a 6-man like there once was. And GGG's goal, where they wanted to bring down the top and bring up the base game a lot, I think they've succeeded in their goal there. I think it's a little disappointing from my perspective just because I really like playing with my friend. I like getting in a big group. I like seeing lots of drops. And for me, that portion of the game has essentially been deleted, which I understand, but unfortunately there's not much else in the game to engage with in a large party or even a smaller party like 3 to 4 people, because there's tons of mechanics in the game that just simply do not scale with the number of players in your party. If you think about it, you go into a ritual, only one person gets to shop, you don't get any more tribute. Beast farming used to be a thing you could do in a large party. However, that was also sniped this patch. You basically only get maybe 2 beasts per 6-man party if you capture a beast now. The thing that used to exist was just high-end MF scaling with multipliers, and that is simply just gone, and now there's nothing else for us to engage in, which is fine. That is their design intention. But from our perspective, it's just kind of like the fun has been sucked out, I guess. Because right now there is no reason, no incentive, no nothing to play in a party. Now, we still had a very good time. It was fun, getting together with friends, and we had a great time the days that we were playing. But towards the end of day 4, day 5, we were basically just breaking even, and we might have made a small profit if we had dropped a T0 unique like Mage Blood. But those profits are going to pale in comparison to if we just all played solo and combined all of our money. And so that's kind of the current state of endgame MFing. Essentially, there's a window on the first couple days where you can, play a lot, play a shit ton, get ahead of everybody else. If you get into Kirak maps early on and you can start shitting uniques out onto the market, there's definitely a window to abuse there. But on about day 4 or 5, when the uniques really tank in value, your profit margins are essentially just going to be obliterated, and then there's nothing else for you to do. For us, it feels kind of extra bad because it feels like another slap in the face, kind of, because we didn't really get a clear answer on whether or not rarity was going to affect the new conversions, and it was just kind of shrugged off to the side. And when they were asked directly in the Ziggy Q&A, it was just kind of like they didn't have an answer yet, but we clearly have an answer now, where we do know that rarity is almost a completely useless stat beyond the first couple days where uniques are okay to farm, and past those first couple days, it is a really dead stat now, and it makes MFing in an even worse state. There is something to be said about quantity juicing with the rares, and I think there is something to do there, but it's only in smaller party numbers. The more people you're adding to your party, you're just kind of dividing your profits by 6, and it doesn't really make sense anymore. And more largely on this point, it feels really bad to be surprised with these changes when you get to the end game, and I sympathize a lot with the people that are just having their strategy Shadownerf. It feels so bad to not have these things communicated beforehand, especially when people are asking the devs directly in a Q&A, where they're asked, do we know anything about rarity and conversions on the new patch? And instead of just answering the question like, no, it's just kind of shrugged off. And it feels extra bad to discover things like the Maven nerfs, where Awakened gems have been severely nerfed, but in the pre-patch, it was marketed as now you can get Awakened gems from just killing map bosses. So it's like a buff for everybody. But in reality, the majority of the Awakened gems were coming from Maven, and that substantial source of gems was just deleted, essentially. This extends to the Blighted maps, where I'll show a tweet here from Travik, where the epidemiology notable was changed to have the 3 lucky chests instead of a quant bonus, or an effective mods rather. And it was marketed as you don't have to respec into it, but in reality, it was just kind of taken away. Same thing with the synthesis nodes. Synthesis nodes were previously just taken away. And then the invitation nodes, where simultaneous release as well as the 100% effective invitation modifiers was just removed, even though it was marketed as we no longer have to spend our regrets on it. We don't even know which boss passives are baked into what at the moment, but it's just kind of disingenuous to me to market it as they're baking in all of these boss passes and we no longer have to be burdened by speccing into it. It's just a little strange. That is something I wish was communicated a little better, because it feels really bad to plan out maybe a boss killer or an invitation farmer, and then oops, all of a sudden your 100% increase effective modifiers is gone from the Atlas tree that wasn't even released until the morning of the patch. So I wish they did that better. I really did. Last thing to talk about here is the league mechanic itself, Sanctum in a party. And to me, honestly, Sanctum in a party is one of the most laughable league mechanics that they've ever released in the context of multiplayer. I'm not going to speak on the single player experience, but immediately it is clear that they do not want anybody playing with their friends, even in a group size of 2 or larger. It is simply just a complete grief to go into that mechanic with anybody but yourself. The problems range from visual clarity to setting off the traps for people that aren't yourself. You guys share one resolve bar. It's not even doubled or tripled for, having 2 or 3 people in there. You don't even get any rewards for bringing in additional people. So if you're to bring in 3 people or 4 people, only one person is getting anything. And that's even if you can complete it. And it is laughably hard to get through any of these encounters without failing, because there's just more people to get hit by things. So even if you can convince somebody to come with you for no rewards, the mechanic actually gets harder when you add more people people because the resolve bar doesn't scale. And it's super easy to set off traps or mines, and if somebody's like, you know, a few steps behind you, they're the one that's getting hit by the mines and therefore losing your resolve bar. And if you have 2 people following you or something like that, the mines blow up on 2 people and your resolve bar is just instantly getting deleted. It's non-functional, which is okay. And maybe their design intention is that they don't want it to work in a party at all, but it's really disappointing after seeing stuff like Ultimatum, where I think the mechanic worked flawlessly in a party where each person gets to select their own rewards and everybody gets to have fun. And it is depressing to see mechanics like this where one person gets the reward, it takes forever to clear the Sanctum, and the mechanic gets harder for more people you add. And not a single thought has gone into it about how it would interact in a party. So it feels like it's not even worth engaging in at all, because I want to play the game with my friends and I'm not super interested in playing it solo. Those are just our quick thoughts on the League mechanic. Yeah, I think that sums up my general thoughts on the League mechanic, the state of the game. The TLDR I think it's an improvement over Kalandra, but I think MF is in a really sad state, and that is part of the game that I enjoy. But I do see that there are a lot of positive things with this patch, especially with the bringing up the floor where general mapping with low investment feels really rewarding and almost too rewarding in my opinion, where you're getting rewarded heavily for 0 investment and you're getting punished for investing too much into your map with wing scarabs. I don't know the solution. It does feel better than Kalandra. I still don't know if it's quite there. I still think they need a couple iterations on this to try and make it better. And I wish there was some form of exponential scaling at the top end that you can engage in that makes endgame mapping really exciting. Because if a 6-man party can't justifiably use wing scarabs and make a profit, then I don't really know who can. And it's just my wish that they would have some sort of avenue for us to scale exponentially like we used to. Because in my opinion, the game was much more enjoyable back then for me. But yeah, thanks for watching, everybody. I'm going to have a highlight video out compiling all of the memes, all of the cool moments, the cool drops we experienced. I'll try and get that out either tonight or tomorrow. But yeah, thanks for watching, and I hope you have a great rest of your week. And I'm Snap, and thanks for watching.